Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. First question. My goals for my chest and legs are more hypertrophy oriented, and my deadlift goal is strength oriented. How do you recommend programming for an intermediate lifter in this situation? Honestly, you don't really need to program that differently, because at the end of the day, if you're a drug-free lifter, there is going to be an enormous correlation between the size and strength of any given muscle. And any periodization or programming or anything you do that adds more strength over time to any of these basic lifts is going to put more size on you. So you don't really need to separate the two. I think what you mean is that you're talking about your 1 rep maxes. You're like, well, I want a higher max deadlift. So you mean actual maximum power, maximum strength, not just normal strength. Because if you're training the deadlift in the 5 to 8 rep range all the time, you're going to get really, really strong at your max if you just spend 3 or 4 weeks peaking to actually work on your max. You're actually going to build your max up tremendously by doing that. And you know what? That 5 to 8 rep range, or any rep range that you do through any periodization, is going to put a large amount of size on you. So as an intermediate lifter, you don't really need to separate the two so much, other than, basically you're just going to need peaking phases. If you actually want a max deadlift or whatever event or something you're trying to do it, or you want to show off on a max, then you're going to need to take a phase to actually peak your max and work on your 1 to 3 rep range. But as far as the overall size goes, any regular periodized program, it doesn't matter whether it's Mad Cows, it doesn't matter whether it's the Texas method, it doesn't matter whether it's my intermediate program, it's going to put size and strength on you concurrently. You just do the different blocks. You're going to train different performance elements. You're going to gain more size in certain phases than others, but ultimately any phase in which you get stronger in those lifts is going to let you gain more size in the next phase. So I really wouldn't worry about separating the two. And as an intermediate lifter, if you really want to gain maximum size or maximum strength, you're going to need to focus on the different performance elements in a good balanced program. So any of those is fine. There's no need to separate those two. The only time you really need to worry about what you're thinking of as maximum strength, maybe a 1 rep max, is going to be when you want to actually show it off. And you know what? You need to prepare for that. And honestly, I'm going to say that peaking your max deadlift year round isn't going to work anyways. That's going to burn you out. So just train it like your other lifts, just with a little less total sets, because you don't need as many sets on the deadlift usually. So again, any of those programs will be fine. All right, next question. Would you say that after a 90-minute weight workout that we ingest nothing for a while so that the blood can be effectively used where it is needed? That being in the muscles, I have been ingesting 20 to 50 grams of a protein powder within minutes of finishing my weight workout, but I'm rethinking spending $50 every 6 to 8 weeks, and now thinking about eating high protein foods such as organic tuna that has 0 fat and 13 grams of protein per can when I'm done. Thoughts? All right, well, if you're sitting here talking about not eating intentionally, that's just as silly as the people who are obsessed with getting in fast absorbing protein and carbs immediately post-workout. Neither one are that big of a deal. You know what? The blood is going to go where it needs to go for your training and muscles, even if you do eat. It's just not going to send that much to your GI tract, but you probably should eat something after you train. Protein powders are obviously overrated. They're not necessary. They have no benefits over eating other normal foods post-workout. There's just no reason to think that you need them. That's the main issue that we're talking about with a lot of that. Now, I'm going to say with your tuna steaks, the fact that it's organic doesn't really mean anything. Also, you need to understand that tuna is not something you want to eat every day. You need to be aware of the mercury content in tuna due to pollution in the waters, and your organic tuna is not going to be any different. So I'm going to say, generally speaking, consuming tuna every single day is a bad idea in the long term. The FDA has plenty of data on that. It has charts showing you how much you can safely consume, everything else. And every time someone says, well, I consumed tuna every day for 20 years, and I know someone else who did, well, that's fine. That's well and good. And you can wait for your bone cancer for another 10 years. Just because you consume something that we know puts extra mercury in your system, which gets stored in your bones, which could contribute to something like, again, bone cancer on a very high level. Just because you haven't developed bone cancer yet doesn't mean that you haven't harmed yourself, but that you're not going to. The available data says that it's not a good idea to do. So I would recommend sticking with that. But you know what? Fine, eat you some chicken and rice, eat you some steak and potatoes, whatever. Whole foods post-workout, though, are perfectly fine. There's no need to think that you need a protein shake. There's never been a need for them, and there never will be a need for them. All right, next question. If a drug-free lifter will max out their gains after, say, 6 to 10 years of lifting on a decent program, and it's much easier to maintain muscle than it is to gain, would you say then that guys who lift in their 30s, 40s, and beyond really need to come in a couple times a week and just do a reasonably difficult 5 to 8 rep max set on each of the main lifts, and then spend the remainder of their time focusing on cardio to preserve health and stay relatively lean? All right, brother, I can't help but feel that you're kind of trolling me here, because you said almost word for word something I made an entire video on already, talking about maintaining your gains. That, yeah, once a guy reaches a size where they're happy with, they're not concerned with gaining much anymore, and they say, okay, I'm big enough, strong enough, let me just stay where I'm at, then yeah, they could do exactly that. They could come in a couple times a week, do one set on all their main exercises in the 5 to 8 rep range, and they can stay right where they are. But you know what? If they actually progress on those, they'll probably still gain a little bit of muscle and strength over the years. But yeah, I think that's perfectly acceptable, because they will gain all of the health benefits of the weight training. They'll keep their size and strength just fine with minimal risk of overtraining, overreaching, burnout, anything like that. And then they can spend their other time doing cardio and other stuff that's going to have other health benefits. And yeah, I think that's a good idea. Honestly, I don't train that much different than that. I do probably a little more volume, obviously, than I recommend there, because sometimes I come in and I do multiple sets of things like my pen lay rows and my dips and stuff like that. But you know what, at the end of the day, I oftentimes only do about one serious work set, and I only train 3 days a week, you know, and that's enough for most guys to be pretty big and pretty strong once they've already built their base, if they're just not that obsessed with pushing more gains all the time. Perfectly acceptable. And again, it gives them more time and energy to focus on other health-oriented endeavors, maybe endeavors specific to their needs, something else they want to do in life, whether they play golf or shoot 3-gun or whatever it is they happen to do. Yeah, they could put a little more effort into some of their sport-specific training. And then again, do plenty of cardio to stay healthy and fit. All right, next question. In your opinion, what deadlift variation will directly help to add more to your conventional deadlift out of the deficit, stiff leg, Romanian, or sumo? Or is it just preference? No, this one isn't just preference. You know, all of those exercises can have some carryover to your conventional deadlift, but the one that is going to have the most carryover is going to be the deficit deadlift. And the reason is because the bar path is basically the same. It's the same movement pattern. And it works the weakest point of the deadlift for most people as an accessory movement. And what do I mean by that? Well, compare that to all the other lifts. Sumo, your stance is different, your bar path is different, the muscle priority worked is completely different. Romanian deadlift, same thing, different range of motion, different focus. It's eccentric focus with more focus on the hamstrings. It doesn't ever touch the ground, so it's not carrying over as much to your pop out of the bottom, which is the weakest point in the deadlift for everyone. And what else did you mention there? Let me look again. Oh yeah, stiff leg. You know, stiff leg is actually probably going to be the number 2 behind the deficit deadlift, because again, you're working some of the weak points, you're pulling from the floor, full range of motion, usually really long range of motion on that, but it's not going to carry over quite as much as the deficit deadlift will. And again, the reason the deficit deadlift carries over so well, it's basically the same exercise with added range of motion at the weakest point in the exercise for 90% of lifters. 90% of lifters, if they have a weakness on the deadlift, even on their max in competition, it's directly off the floor. The deficit deadlift works the weak point harder, which again makes you better at it. It's going to make it easier through that weak point when you go back to your normal range of motion. So yeah, the deficit deadlift, definitely king on this one as far as carry over to the conventional deadlift. All right, next question. You once said the overhead press is a proven upper chest builder. Is it enough by itself, or should I add some sort of incline press? I've lost a lot of weight and have lost some loose skin on my chest, and I'm trying to fill it out. You know what? It absolutely depends on the person, but I'm going to say that if for most people, if you're working your overhead press fairly hard and you're doing at least one other big exercise for your overall chest, doesn't matter whether it's a bench press, a floor press, a closed grip bench press, weighted dips, whatever you're doing, those are going to build most of your chest up, even to some extent your upper chest. The overhead press, again, if you go all the way down, is also a good upper chest exercise. So for most lifters, if you're focusing heavy on at least 2 of those exercises, meaning obviously the overhead press being one of the 2, and then any of those others is a primary chest builder, your upper chest is going to fill out quite nicely. However, For some individuals, the upper chest can lag due to their genetics or structure or whatever else. But for most people, they're going to be okay. So it really depends on your genetics. If you've been working those really hard and progressing on those and you still feel like your upper chest is lagging in proportion, then yeah, go ahead and add an incline in. It's probably not a bad idea at that point. But for a lot of people, it might not be necessary. They're going to get everything they need out of the overhead press and some other main chest exercise. Again, as long as they're performing the exercises correctly through the full range of motion, all of that goodness. So again, a lot of guys, they perform certain presses in a way that de-emphasizes the chest, and that's stuff I've covered in other videos. If you're doing that, you're going to struggle with overall chest development. But that's just a technique issue on things like the bench press and everything else. It's totally fixable. All right, next question. Periodization or concurrent training better for cutting? Or if neither, what program would be best for cutting for non-novices? Honestly, you know, people overthink this. It really comes down to what you want to do, because truth is, when you're cutting, odds are you're not going to progress very much. And most of you, everything from your concurrent training up to your various periodization is focused upon helping you make gains and make progress, but you're not going to be able to make them. So honestly, if I had to pick between the two, if someone says, what's the most ideal, I would say either picking just a set rep range and just training it with your current lifts and trying to maintain them. Preferably, again, some moderately heavy. You know, I would say anything from the 5 to 10 rep range is fine. Or you could do concurrent training. It's just like I recommend to guys, concurrent training is ideal for in-season athletes because they're just trying to maintain all of their performance elements. Concurrent training isn't a bad approach either for cutting for the same purposes. You're trying to maintain all your performance elements, size, strength, everything else while on a calorie deficit. It's not a bad approach at all. But again, you have to remember that no matter what you do with these, focusing on progression is probably not the best of idea. Now, if you can make a little bit of progression without burning yourself out, hey, great, fantastic, do so. But we also get into the debate here of, are you trying to use the weight training itself to help you burn extra calories? Or are you just using the weight training to maintain your muscle and strength and then trying to use a lot more cardio to burn calories? And that's where it gets tricky, and that's why this isn't an easy question to answer, because both approaches work, both approaches have been used. I generally recommend to people, just because I think they need more conditioning anyways, and conditioning meaning cardiovascular conditioning, not the weird ideas that bodybuilders have about it, that it means your body fat, because that's a weird interpretation of conditioning that no one would accept in exercise science. It's one little niche community uses that. I mean, actual cardiovascular conditioning, I tend to lean in the direction of people doing a little less volume training, doing enough to maintain their size and strength, and doing cardio to create a larger deficit. I think that's the best way to do it in terms of fatigue management. But other people choose to do it just with high volumes of weight training, you know. But I think fatigue management becomes a bigger issue there. I think irritability becomes a bigger issue. Burnout becomes a bigger issue. But technically, it would be easier for them to maintain the most muscle mass on that if they can have proper fatigue management. But a lot of guys mess that up, and it ends up going the other direction. All right, next question. And last question of the week. Hey Jason, what do you recommend for calves that simply won't grow? My black man calves get strong as hell, but just won't grow. Honestly, truth be told, they're going to grow. Now, the thing you need to remember, of course, people joke with stuff like black calves, just like with black genetics and everything else. You have to remember, yes, some black guys gain muscle easier than other people. It's a minority of people. The same thing with the whole black calves thing. It's a bit of a myth. There are quite a few black people who, because of where they come from, their ancestors did, they have less total calf muscles in their legs, which also makes them better distance runners, but they have less calf muscle in their leg than average other humans do. And again, it's just a product of their environment, of their ancestors. But the thing is, that is kind of a myth, because there are also a lot of black people who have enormous calves, and, you know, just like mountain-dwelling white people do, whose ancestors come up from Germany and everything else. So, you know, that's the thing with genetics like that. It really varies, and it's not all set in stone. But I do know what you mean. You probably have those runner's calves is what people think of. And again, that's common from certain regions of Africa. So, you know, the thing is, just like any other muscle, you have a few less muscle fibers in there. You have less starting muscle to work with. You have less total development you're going to make. But you know what? They are growing. If you are training your calves and they are getting stronger and stronger and stronger, I can assure you beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are growing. All right, you don't gain strength in a muscle without size. What you have to do, just like anyone else who has a genetic weak point that isn't as gifted as someone else that they know that they struggle with. You have to just keep working on it. Keep working on it. Make it a priority. If it's important to you, if you work it harder and more consistently with higher frequency over time, over the months, over the years, you can turn around a genetic weak point. You know, you just have to prioritize it. And at the end of the day, that's all it's about, is that when it comes down to genetics with certain things, some people are just more gifted at certain things than others. They don't have to work as hard. And someone else is going to have to work 5 times as hard to get the same results. But, you know, if you put in the time and the consistency and you keep making them stronger month after month, year after year, your calves are eventually going to get big. Are they going to get as big as the same potential that someone else with amazing calf genetics might have? No. But can you get them big enough to where they look good and they're impressive? Yes, absolutely. You can absolutely do so. You're just going to have to be consistent and you're going to have to be patient. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.